Hello and welcome to episode number 208, where I'm speaking with Leonard Perlmutter, who I spoke with back in episode number 204 about accessing the wisdom of your conscience. In this episode, we talk about using diaphragmatic breathing to access the conscience and to help coordinate the four functions of the mind. So please stay tuned. Welcome to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. I'm your host, Colette, and I hope to educate and empower you to take charge of your health and well-being, preventing disease in the body and mind so that you can thrive in life. I will be sharing the holistic teachings of Ayurveda, which is the ancient healing tradition from India. I will also discuss topics like yoga, which is the sister science of Ayurveda, and various topics under the umbrella of holistic health and planetary health, as well as interviewing lots of inspiring people along the way. My humble wish is to help you to connect to your true nature and to Mother Nature. Now, if you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend listening to the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. And if you like the content, please be sure to subscribe or follow the podcast so the new episodes will automatically download for you. Also, you may want to check out my private Elements community, which is away from social media. It's a safe space for like-minded people to come together, to connect, to share, to support each other, and to continue the conversation from the podcast episodes. Check out the link in the show notes or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com, and just click on the community tab. And I hope to connect with you there. Thanks for listening, and now here's a new episode. Hello and welcome back to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. Today I'm very happy to welcome back Leonard Perlmutter, who is the founder and director of the American Meditation Institute in Averill Park, New York, and is the originator of National Conscience Month. He studied in Rishikesh, India, under Swami Rama of the Himalayas, whose lab studies at the Menninger Institute demonstrated that blood pressure, heart rate, and the autonomic nervous system can be voluntarily controlled. Leonard has presented informative yoga science and meditation workshops at many well-respected medical, Ayurveda and yoga institutions and has served on the faculties of the New England Institute of Ayurvedic Medicine and the International Himalayan Yoga Teachers Association. He is the author and editor of Transformation, the Journal of Yoga Science as Holistic Mind-Body Medicine, and his Heart and Science of Yoga course curriculum has been certified by the Albany Medical College, the American Medical Association, and the American Nurses Association for continuing medical education credit. In our previous episode, which was number 204, called Accessing the Wisdom of Your Conscience, we discussed Leonard's new book called Your Conscience, the key to unlock limitless wisdom and creativity and solve all of life challenges. And it is an amazing book and one that I highly recommend. Leonard, it's fantastic to have you back on the podcast. Thank you for joining us again today.
It's my pleasure. Again, thank you so much for the invitation.
Oh, it's great. I really enjoyed our previous conversation, Leonard. Like I said, that was episode number 204, where we discussed your book. And I really recommended this book as a book for the bedside table. It's a small book, but the way you explained the conscience and in particular the four functions of the mind. And just to remind people, if they haven't, or for people who haven't heard that episode, the four functions of the mind that you explained or went into detail in that episode were number 1, logic and the 5 senses, number 2, ego, number 3, the unconscious mind, and number 4, the conscience. And when I contacted you about doing another episode together, we were interested in continuing the conversation. And then I was asking you, well, what should we have as a follow-up conversation to that previous episode? And you mentioned discussing diaphragmatic breathing. and coordinating the 4 functions of the mind through seated meditation to keep our primary dosha balanced. And I said, I love it. Leonard, let's talk about that. So I think that's a great follow-up, and I'm interested in getting into this conversation. So Leonard, tell me, where should we begin?
Well, let's start with the breath.
Okay.
The breath is the physical manifestation of the mind.
Mm.
And in order to make conscious, discriminating choices that will enable us to fulfill the purpose of our lives without pain, we need to have a mind which is calm. Mm-hmm. At the present time, for most of us, the mind is turbulent because we are aware of anxiety, we're aware of stress, we're aware of burnout. Things are happening at such a fast pace. And the ego and the senses and the unconscious mind really are creating anarchy in the mind because nobody had taught us about the power of the conscience being the only decision maker in the mind. The ego, the senses, the unconscious mind, we now know them as simply advisors. Now, they can be important advisors. They're not always wrong, but gosh, they're wrong a good percentage of the time, and we experience the pain. That's why things are so tense in our lives. So, in order to optimize the conscience, we have to have a calm mind. And if we can calm the breath, it automatically calms the mind. It's amazing. We can't just calm the mind at will because we're still attached to the limited, faulty perspectives of ego, senses, and unconscious mind.
Yes.
So we can't just stop and unplug that necessarily in every situation. But if we can learn to breathe diaphragmatically, that can calm the mind. You see, when we breathe diaphragmatically, when we inhale, the belly swells gently, then the rib cage rises and expands, and the collarbones rise. That inflates the lungs to their full capacity. And with the exhalation, which happens virtually automatically, the belly contracts, forcing air out of the lungs to the full extent possible, which is critically important because 60% of the body's poisons are excreted through breath. That sounded to me like an amazing statistic. 60% of our poisons of the body are excreted through the breath.
Wow.
Only 40% is accounted for through urine, feces, and perspiration.
Oh my goodness, I never heard that percentage before.
Yeah,
and we don't think of the breath as being a chemical reaction in the body.
Right. And so what we need to do is to breathe diaphragmatically, where the inhalation gently yields to the exhalation. And with the inhalation, the belly swells. And with the exhalation, the belly gently contracts. Now that swelling and that contraction is also echoed by the diaphragm, because the diaphragm is activated. As we inhale, and the belly swells, the diaphragm, which is normally at rest in a dome shape, flattens out into the shape of a pancake, increases the space of the thoracic cavity so that the lungs can inflate to their full capacity. And the opposite happens with exhalation. As we exhale and the belly contracts, the diaphragm, this very strong muscle at the base of the thoracic cavity, in the abdominal cavity, then with the exhalation and the belly contracting, the diaphragm resumes its dome shape, sort of an umbrella shape, and that forces air out of the lungs. And if we continue to breathe diaphragmatically, which, by the way, we all started out when we were born breathing diaphragmatically.
Yeah. You see that baby's belly going in and out like a little Buddha belly, yeah?
That's right. But because we have become so stressed, we have discarded the diaphragmatic breathing and we have become chest breathers. When we are breathing diaphragmatically, the belly swelling, the belly contracting, the diaphragm going up and down. Now, that up and down motion of the diaphragm is critically important, and it only happens during diaphragmatic breathing. Because what happens is the longest nerve, the vagus nerve, which starts at the brainstem, goes through the thoracic and the abdominal cavities, goes right through the diaphragm. As we're breathing diaphragmatically, belly swelling, belly contracting, the diaphragm is stimulated or massaged. And what that does is it sends a message back to the amygdala in the brain that there is no threat. There is no danger, regardless of whether it was real or just perceived. And that means that the cascade of hormones and adrenaline ceases. That will calm the mind. That's why diaphragmatic breathing is so important, because it stimulates the vagus nerve that alerts the amygdala to turn off the hormones, and immediately the mind is at a state of equanimity. And that's what we're looking for, to make really the best choices that we can by seeking the guidance of our conscience.
Absolutely. Yes. Great explanation. And yes, and to that the breath is the fastest, simplest tool we have to calm the mind. And like you said, making choices from a place of clarity and calmness in the parasympathetic nervous system rather than in the fight or flight in the sympathetic nervous system.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, I'd love to go back, Leonard, to something you said at the start and explain to people a little bit more about what happens our breath when we are in that fight or flight state, the sympathetic nervous system. You said the breath is the physical manifestation of the mind. So we've all experienced something like that, be it we witness an accident or we get an email with terrible news. It could be, it doesn't necessarily have to be something happening to us. It could just be that we have an email or we read something on the news that affects us deeply, and our breath gets very shortened, right? And so can you talk about a little bit what happens when we're in a state like that? What happens with our breath and with the systems of our body?
Well, it's quite profound, because what we develop are jerks and pauses, little halts in our breath. Could be between inhalation and exhalation, could be between exhalation and inhalation. We know that when a danger arises, we might hold our breath. But throughout the day, if you just examine your own breath, you'll be aware of, in certain kind of emotional situations, that the breath is choppy, and that choppy breath and halting of the breath in yoga science is equated with death. Obviously, if we hold our breath long enough, we're all going to leave the building.
Yeah.
But even in a subtle level, when we do not breathe diaphragmatically, where the inhalation gently yields to the exhalation, I'm breathing full to my complete capacity, and instead I have these jerks and pauses in the breath. What happens is we don't have enough prana nor oxygen to feed the brain, which means that every day millions of brain cells die for want of appropriate energy. Now, that might not be so bad when we're teenagers or 20 or 30 or even 40 perhaps. But by the time we reach 50 or 60 or 70 or 80, when you add up all these brain cells that have been destroyed or damaged, it's a major cause of dementia in the afternoon of life. Just because you age, does that mean that you're going to experience dementia? No, but there are things that we can do now while we're healthy, relatively, to assure that we will have a vital brain and mind in the afternoon and even into the late afternoon of life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I use the example there of some emotional events, like witnessing a crash or getting an email with terrible news, or watching the news these days can be quite emotional. But like, as you mentioned earlier, it's not just these emotional events, our day-to-day life, where now we're doing a lot of multitasking and a lot of pressure is put on us and we have a lot of stress in our lives. Our day-to-day lives can cause our breath to be affected, particularly if we're on edge all the time and we're under a lot of stress, right?
Correct. Absolutely. And it's my experience is that if we're under stress and we're not breathing correctly, that slows down not only the digestion and the assimilation process, but also the elimination process.
Yeah. Right, because if our body thinks, because of the way we're breathing, our body doesn't know that we're just highly stressed in work and that we're just trying to meet a deadline, for example. Our body may think that we're in some severe crisis, and so it shuts down digestion, right? It shuts down all those non-essential systems in the body and sends the blood to the extremities, because our body's thinking, I don't know what's going on, but we probably may need to run, fight or flight shortly. Yeah.
That's right. And it doesn't have to be a real occurrence. I could just imagine it.
Yes.
Or I could just be reacting to something that I saw on the television or in a news report.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily have to be the truth.
Yeah.
But I'm physiologically reacting to it. And the more that I give attention to it, that's analogous to meditating. So if you meditate, for example, on a toothache, you're going to have a whopper of a toothache.
Yeah.
Yes, and if you go all the way back to Epictetus, this first century Greek philosopher, who says that something to the effect that it's not what we perceive in the world necessarily that causes the dis-ease in the mind and in the body. It's what we think about it.
Oh, right. Our reaction, our perception, as you mentioned in the last episode.
Right. So it's very interesting. We constantly see what we know. And so much of what we know, these concepts that are stored in our unconscious mind, happen to be faulty. And we continue to suffer from them, just like our mom did, or our dad, or our grandma, or grandpa, whoever gifted us these concepts.
Right, these ways of being. So, for example, if my grandmother was a fearful person, I spent a lot of time in her presence as a child.
Yeah. Examining her face and the way her face contorted in a certain situation. And you knew that, in this kind of a situation, perhaps I should be fearful too.
Right. And so I'm taking on that way of being in the world as something I learned as a child.
Yes.
That's how I should react. And now that has become mine. Yeah.
Our parents, our grandparents, they became our first computer program people.
Right.
They program our software.
Yeah. So now it's once you have the awareness that this is happening in your body and you see that these ways of being, these learned patterns are not serving you, that is about implementing a new software, a new operating system.
Yes. And for that, we need appropriate tools. That's all. I don't know whether I mentioned this in our last conversation, but my auto mechanic of many, many years taught me many decades ago that if you have the right tool every job is relatively easy.
Very good.
So if we are suffering from an agitated mind and improper breathing, if we have the right tools, diaphragmatic breathing is a correct tool. And all we have to do is learn to breathe as we did when we were newborns.
Yes, because as we go through life, we're often, like you said, chest breathers, so we're only using a very small percentage of our lung capacity.
That's right. And so we suffer in many respects because we're not getting enough prana, enough energy. We're not getting enough oxygen. We're not eliminating the poisons adequately.
Yeah.
So this constantly puts stress on the entire physiology, not only the mind.
Yeah. And I remember learning when I was studying pranayama that I remember learning about when the diaphragm is pushing down, that it's also massaging and detoxing the organs of the body.
Absolutely. So that's why we need to make the diaphragmatic breathing our new default breath, which means that throughout the day we need to check when we're driving the automobile, when we're trying to fall asleep, when we're seated at the dinner table for a meal, we have to check, is the belly swelling? Is the belly contracting gently? And the more that we can establish the diaphragmatic breathing in all those cases, I will be able to receive sleep easier. I will be able to digest and assimilate and eliminate easier if the diaphragmatic breathing is my new default breath.
Okay, wonderful. So you talked about the importance of diaphragmatic breathing and that the vagus nerve runs through the diaphragm and how that sends communication back to the brain that the body is in a safe space when it's perceiving that we are breathing deeply and using the full capacity of our lungs and depressing the diaphragm completely. So let's talk about the process of it. How do we practice it? What are the best practices? And how can we get this to be on autopilot and to be our default system of breathing?
Well, yoga has a couple of very positive postures. Chief among them is the Crocodile Posture, and folks can look that up. Basically, you're lying on the floor, face down, and you have your left hand on the upper part of your right forearm, your right hand on the upper part of your left forearm, and your forehead is resting on your wrist. Now, you don't want your arms to be out too far because you don't want to collapse that nice little curve in the lower back. On the other hand, you don't want your arms in too close to your chest because you don't want to pinch muscles in your neck. So you just sort of look for a nice sweet spot where the body is stable and it is comfortable. And then you bring your attention to the navel region, and you witness each inhalation and each exhalation, each inhalation and each exhalation. And to your amazement, what you will find is automatically you are breathing diaphragmatically. When you are in this posture, there is no other way to breathe other than diaphragmatically. So when you're lying down on the floor and your attention is at the navel region, with each inhalation, you will notice that the belly is pushing against the floor. And with each exhalation, the belly is contracting away from the floor. So this reintroduces us to diaphragmatic breathing. Of course, we want to expand that a little bit. In other words, after the belly begins to swell with the inhalation, make sure that the rib cage rises and expands to the fullest capacity, and even allow the clavicles, the collarbones to rise so that the lung tissue can inflate to its full, comfortable capacity. And the same, only different, with the exhalation. we want to make sure that the belly contracts, nice and gently, no jerks, no pauses, no sounds, all breathing through the nostrils, not the mouth.
Right. Right. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, the importance of breathing through the nostrils, if you could, please.
Well, it's pretty commonsensical because the nostrils only can clean, moisten the air, purify the air. The mouth cannot do that.
Right.
And when we swallow all that air, it causes gas in our stomach. Not a good thing for digestion nor for elimination.
Right. And isn't it more calming as well for the body to breathe in and out through the nose?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's more the body perceives stress when it's breathing in and out through the mouth, right?
Yeah.
And so in diaphragmatic breathing, do you encourage a pause at the top and the bottom of the breath, the top of the inhale and the bottom of the exhale?
No, I do not.
Okay.
No, I do not. I understand, and I'm very familiar that is what might be termed an advanced yoga practice.
Okay.
But so many people are so stressed out and really not connected to their own diaphragmatic breathing capability that to introduce any pause at this point in their study and experimenting would only make matters worse. First thing that we want to do is to encourage people to have a seamless breath, just like you're swimming laps in a pool where you swim to one end, you turn around and you kick off and you're going in the other direction and back and forth. Inhalation, gently yielding to exhalation. Exhalation, gently yielding to inhalation. No jerks, no pauses, no sounds, all breathing through the nostrils.
Okay, great. That's really good advice. And so do you encourage when people are starting to learn this breath that they do a count, a certain number of inhale, or how do you encourage them to know?
Because counting causes jerks in the mind, which causes jerks in the breath.
Okay.
So when we're breathing, use the point-to-point method. In other words, inhale, for example, from your toes to your crown, the crown of the head, and exhale from the crown of the head to the toes. Or you can inhale from the base of the spine to the crown and exhale from the crown of the head back to the base of the spine. Either method would work.
Yeah.
In fact, maybe I would recommend that people start this 1-to-1 ratio of inhalation to exhalation. Start inhaling from the base of the spine to the crown of the head and exhale from the crown of the head through the body to the base of the spine. So do that for a couple of weeks. And if you can do that for a couple of weeks without jerks, pauses, or sounds, then you can extend the exhalation. So what you do there, you do, instead of 1-to-1 ratio breathing, you can do 2-to-1 ratio breathing, where you inhale, you still begin the inhalation from the base of the spine, follow the inhalation, you witness it, you're not doing anything, you're not changing the rate or the rhythm or the depth of the breath, you're in the witnessing state, so you're observing the breath going up, up, up from the base of the spine to the crown, and then when the breath reaches the crown, you follow the exhalation from the crown through the entire body back to the toes. So that will be twice the exhalation for the inhalation. And then again, you inhale from the base of the spine to the crown, and again you exhale from the crown to the tips of the toes. Rather than counting, which creates jerks, if you're just observing the breath flowing, just like you're watching a bird in flight, you're witnessing the breath going up from the base of the spine to the crown, and then flowing from the crown to the tips of the toes.
Wonderful. Would you take us through a sample of that so we can sample it in real time? Could you talk us through a sample? That would be fantastic. Sure. I guess as if we're seated, because most people if we're seated rather than laying down, that we can just close our eyes and great.
So if everybody can just find a nice comfortable posture in the chair in which you're seated, try to make sure that the head, neck, and trunk are straight. Okay? And to do that, gently roll the shoulders forward 3 times, gently, slowly, and then back, big circle, back with the shoulders, rotate the shoulders back, good, and then gently bring the shoulders up toward the ears, squeeze, and then precipitously let them go. Again, bring the shoulders up, squeeze by the ears, and then precipitously just let them go. Good, good. Now that should provide a nice comfortable posture and a stable posture. You're not in a military posture where everything is tense. No, you're relaxed. The body is comfortable. It's stable. Now, join the finger lock. The thumb and the index finger on both hands should be joined, palms gently resting on the thighs. Eyes gently closed. And we're going to be bringing our attention now to the breath. Notice it flowing from the base of the spine to the crown of the head, and then from the crown of the head to the base of the spine. So follow the inhalation from the base of the spine to the crown of the head, and if you'd like, you can listen to the breath's natural mantra for inhalation. So, and with the exhalation from the crown to the base of the spine, listen to the breath's natural mantra for exhalation. Hum. Give your full attention. Follow the inhalation with the so, all the way to the crown, and follow the hum with the exhalation back to the base of the spine. And we'll do that for 60 seconds, starting now. And gently open your eyes. Now, the first thing that I want to mention is thinking is a habit of the mind. And when we do all these kinds of practices, whether it's a breath exercise, pranayama exercise, or a meditation, going in, we have to know that it is the habit of the mind to become distracted. And that's okay, because at some time, maybe the reptilian brain is correct and maybe there is a danger. But in most cases, and certainly in this particular case, there's no threat. So we have to be forewarned and forearmed that that's just part of the habit of the mind, and it's also part of a breathing practice. It's also part of the meditation practice. knowing that the mind is going to become distracted and entertain a thought or an image or pay attention to a sound. It's not a problem. We simply honor and witness the distraction, lovingly sacrifice it, offer it back to the origin from which it came, and then gently bring the mind back, in this particular case, to the breath flowing between the base of the spine and the crown to the base of the spine, listening to the so with the inhalation and the hum with the exhalation.
Wonderful.
And you only have to do that for 60 seconds. Don't take on too much too soon.
Yeah. Right. So you suggest 60 seconds, a particular time of day. Should we set a reminder for ourselves to do it throughout the day?
You can do it throughout the day. In fact, if you are at work, if you're working, or if you're busy doing something, take a 60-second break for yourself.
Yeah.
And it will calm the breath. It will also calm the mind. You will have more clarity of vision. You'll become more creative. You'll be less reactionary. Mm-hmm. You'll be more inclined to allow your conscience to be your guide, and you will be able to then parent your ego and senses and unconscious mind and let them know that in this particular situation, they have a faulty perspective. But you do it lovingly. You don't do it out of anger or frustration. It's all an act of love. I love my ego. I love my senses. I love my unconscious mind. Are they wrong sometimes? Sure. Okay, but nobody has trained them. We never learned that in school.
Yeah.
We have to teach it ourselves. First, we have to learn about it, which we are doing right now through Colette's teaching. And then we have to educate and train the ego, senses, and unconscious mind.
Exactly. And so through this breath, we're bringing our body into a relaxed state, the parasympathetic nervous system. So we're less reactionary, and we can, like you said, we can parent the ego, the unconscious mind, and the senses.
Correct.
And then have more clarity and take the wisdom or access the wisdom of the conscience.
Yes, the conscience is always capable, if the ego, senses, and unconscious mind are quiet for a moment. The conscience, as we've discussed before, has the unique capacity to reflect superconscious wisdom from the superconscious portion of the mind at the center of consciousness, at the core of our being, that we euphemistically refer to as our soul, that spark of God that is within us, that is us having this human experience.
So by bringing our mind into a relaxed state via the breath, that we can access that conscience more readily, and that the ego and the unconscious mind and the senses are more pacified in that state.
Yes, and we are providing a pleasant experience, not an unpleasant experience for the ego, senses, and unconscious mind. Right. Because if we can meditate or do the breathing practice as we've just done for 60 seconds, we feel a pleasant experience, and so does the ego, senses, and unconscious mind.
Yeah, they're very much pacified.
Yes.
Okay, great. And I can imagine, as you suggested, doing that throughout the day, doing that before you eat. So you're focused on your food, especially if you're in your office and you're going to eat, rather than multitasking while eating, which we know in Ayurveda is a terrible thing to do and can cause digestive upset. But I often recommend that people take a few moments just to breathe before you eat. So you're bringing your body into a relaxed state. Or if you're going into a meeting, or even for some people who are doing therapy work, that after a client that they do a moment, and before that they do a moment of breath. I think it's great as a transition, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
That's right. I just want to add one parenthetical. I agree with 100% of what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
One additional thing is that many times we emphasize the negative, and so we want to ameliorate the dis-ease of a negative situation, fear or anger or stress.
Mm-hmm.
But intense excitement and pleasure also can agitate the mind. I think of myself years ago, decades ago now, flying in an airplane through a thunderstorm. And it was very agitating, very upsetting. And of course, I used my breath practices, and I was able to calm the mind. But when the airplane landed, I was exhilarated.
Right.
You see?
Yeah.
And so I needed to calm the mind and the breath at that time, too. In the midst of this exhilaration, I don't want to let myself become so attached to the exhilaration, because these are pairs of opposites. In the absence of one, like the agitation, the exhilaration appears. So we want to be able to go beyond these pairs of opposites, pleasure and pain, victory and defeat, praise and blame. And most people who have not experienced that think that what we're talking about is boring. No. It's joyous fullness and bliss without those extreme highs and extreme lows that keep us addicted.
Exactly. Very good point. Yes. And you talked about that in our previous episode as well, that addiction to the pleasure and to the exhilaration or the adrenaline rush. And so the middle path, as Ayurveda and yoga recommend, taking the middle path where there's not that swinging high and low and the pendulum is not going back and forth wildly, which of course causes a lot of stress on our body.
That's right.
And so I wanted to circle back to keeping our primary dosha balanced through diaphragmatic breathing as well.
Yes. Well, if the mind is calm, I'm going to make better choices. I'm going to be able to parent the ego, senses, and unconscious mind. I will hear what they have to say, but then I will ask them to be quiet so that the conscience can reflect superconscious wisdom, so that I can make the best choice that I can every moment. And especially when we consider experimenting with food, there are certain things that we should ask ourselves as we experiment, because each aspect can be an experiment. So, for example, I ask myself all the time, did I consume adequate protein commensurate with the level of my activity? How many times did I chew before swallowing? Now, that's an interesting experiment in and of itself. Go to a restaurant or a fast food place and just carefully watch people eat.
Right.
And count the number of times they chew before they swallow. My experience is if they get to 3 chews before they swallow, that will be a lot.
Wow. And what's the recommended?
I remember from grade school, they said maybe 20, 25 times. Wow. Because digestion starts in the mouth,
exactly.
Right? And the stomach has no teeth.
Yes.
So that wouldn't be kind. But that's what we're doing. We're putting all this added stress on our entire digestive system because we're not chewing. And was I one-pointed attention? Did I have one-pointed attention during the meal? That will facilitate digestion and elimination. And did I appreciate the colors and the smells, the taste and the texture of individual food? This food that I have for breakfast becomes my thoughts, my words, and my actions.
Excellent.
Remember Einstein, E equals MC squared. Energy and matter are constantly interchangeable. We're betting our life every morning on the oatmeal that we have for breakfast. We're betting that we're going to continue to live. And it's true. We eat this food, and it becomes our thoughts, our words, and our actions, which brings about consequences. That's why early Christians referred to this is the body of Christ. Now, it's their way of defining it, but everything is a manifestation of the one. And if I have this meal prepared with love for me, I need to give it attention and respect it for what it is. If I am so lacking in my life that I look to a candy bar or sugar for sweetness in my life, all I have to do is look at my dinner plate at these fantastic orange-colored carrots, and if I take the time to taste them, gosh, they taste very sweet.
Absolutely. When you're paying attention.
Yes.
Yeah, and when you have that awareness, and I love that the food we eat becomes our thoughts, words, and actions that day. Of course, if we're too caffeinated, if we're too hyped up on artificial sugars or preservatives, it definitely affects our actions that day. And then this food as well goes on to become our cells and tissues. And in Ayurveda, as we say, it nourishes all the dhatus, the tissues of the body. So yes, not only what we put in our body, but how we're eating it has a huge effect on our well-being.
Also, what has a huge effect is to know when to stop eating.
Yeah.
Because we need to leave at least 20% of the space of my stomach empty after the meal. At the conclusion of the meal, when there's still space for more food to go down there, that's when you leave the table. Yeah. So to allow the stomach that extra space to digest efficiently rather than in an oppressed state.
Yeah, so true. Great point. Absolutely. Wonderful. So as we finish up here, Leonard, I'd like to, if you could give some advice about, we've talked about the diaphragmatic breathing. We had a lovely example of how we do it. And you suggested doing it just starting with 60 seconds at periods throughout the day. So can you give some guidelines of how to implement it in regards, should we do it like first thing in the morning? I know you talked periodically throughout the day, but do you have any other advice for people?
Well, diaphragmatic breathing should become your default breath throughout the day.
Yes.
There is a marvelous teaching called Nadi Shodhana, which is alternate nostril breathing, that I recommend. Actually, I recommend it to all my students 4 times a day at least. In the morning, prior to meditation and prior to breakfast, before lunch, before dinner, and before you retire in the evening for your evening meditation, and then to receive sleep. So these practices are extremely helpful. Just they're gifts.
Absolutely.
But you have to experiment with it.
Yeah. And they're so simple. We have these tools readily available. They're right there. It doesn't require any other expense. Doesn't require any materials. Yeah, it's so readily available. And I think sometimes when things are so simple, we disregard them.
Yeah.
So I do have a tutorial available on the Nadi Shodhana, the alternate nostril breathing, and I'll add that into the show notes for anybody who's not familiar with that. It's wonderful breath where it's alternate nostril breathing, and there's a few little details of how to do it, and then once you have it, it's pretty simple to learn. So I'll add that link to that tutorial in the show notes, so you'll have access to that. But I do think Nadi Shodhana is particularly very good for balancing both sides of the body. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely. Both sides, the active portion as well as the inwardly directed intuitive. That's the key. And this alternate nostril breathing then allows that Now I'm talking about the energy sheath now, which is another topic altogether. Mm-hmm. But the point is, when that active and the inwardly directed intuitive is balanced, that's when consciousness can rise to the higher chakras to activate them so that we can act skillfully in all situations, even those in which previously we were emotionally hijacked.
Wonderful. Leonard, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to add before we finish up here?
Well, again, I would like to reiterate that don't listen to anything that we say. Don't believe anything that we say to you out there. But if you're interested, experiment with it. That's the only way that you're going to come to own the truth, is through your own experimentation process. And then you become self-reliant and self-confident. Yep. You're less needy. Yep. You don't have a sense of lack about everything.
So true. You become empowered. And it's true, Leonard, when you feel it viscerally in your body, that's when the aha moments happen.
Yes.
And that's when you're more likely to implement these practices on a regular basis, when you feel the effect it has on your body and mind.
Right. That's why we should not take on too much too soon.
Very true.
If it's easy, it will be right. Yeah. And if it's right, it has to be easy.
Yeah, great point. So just 60 seconds.
Yes.
Is a perfect start. Well, Leonard, that is great advice and wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. And I'd love for you to tell people where they can find out more about you, Leonard, your teachings, your offerings, and your book, please.
Sure. The book is Your Conscience, and the website for that is yourconscience.org. I teach at the American Meditation Institute, which I founded in 1996. We have a foundation course on yoga science that I'll invite everybody to take a look at. It's a 6-week course. You receive a free recording each time. It has different components each week, including Ayurveda, including diaphragmatic breathing, including easy jhana yoga, mantra meditation, contemplation, prayer. It's really a holistic course. And the website is americanmeditation.org, americanmeditation.org. And if you do visit the homepage, on the homepage, there's a link for Sunday guided meditation, and it's free. And you receive a free recording. And so look for the guided meditation, the Sunday meditation link on the homepage, and it's free. And it's 9:30 to 11 o'clock Eastern Time in the United States, 9:30 to 11 o'clock Eastern Time in the United States. If you can make it live, then you can participate in a conversation with questions and answers. If not, you can receive the recording.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. That's a wonderful offering.
Thank you.
Leonard, thank you so much. I always enjoy our conversations, and I appreciate you sharing all this wonderful information. And thank you for everything you're doing in the world.
Well, I appreciate everything that you're doing as well.
Thank you, Leonard. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Leonard, and please check out the show notes for the link to yourconscience.org, where you can find Leonard's new book, and also the American Meditation.org website. Also in the show notes, you'll find the link to my download of Pranayama tutorial. And within that tutorial, there is the directions for the Nadi Shodhana, or the alternate nostril breathing practice, which myself and Leonard just spoke about here. In the show notes, you'll find the links to my online services, my online consultations, my at-home Digestive Reset cleanses, which I provide privately throughout the year. And also I have the 28-day self-paced Daily Habits for Holistic Health program, where I help you to implement daily self-care practices. And part of those daily self-care practices are daily breath work. And we sample lots of different types of daily breath practices, and I explain which ones are best for each dosha type and when to use each type of breath practices. So there's lots of education in that course. Talk about the circadian rhythms, talk about how to become your own healer, and how to access your intuition and create a more sattvic life. So check out all those links in the show notes. And if you think that this episode will be helpful to family or friends, I would appreciate it if you would share it with them. If you haven't already subscribed or followed the podcast, please do so wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you would like to leave a rating or review, I would really appreciate that. Thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take good care of yourself, be well, and bye for now. Slán go fóill.